So it was good for her. And now we still get to see her all the time. Oh.
I agree to do so many. I'm open. Yes, I can do that. Yes, yes. And it's 7 o'clock.
microphone files.
They don't know.
They might not know.
Right,
Yeah.
so MJ, I guess I'm just gonna go free flow on this, right?
Exactly.
I'm
Yeah.
we're filming, of course, here.
It's on CTN on YouTube Live.
I'll introduce myself. I'll go around the room and ask them people to introduce themselves.
Perfect.
And then it's sort of a free flow conversation. What I may do, MJ, is kind of sort of frame the mission, okay?
Yep.
Ask some rhetorical questions that we should ponder over the next several months. Sort of
Awesome. Yep. That sounds good.
I may say that, in talking to Representative Nolan, although the session may end in May, we will have the latitude to continue beyond May to come to various conclusions. Okay?
Yes. Okay.
All right,
Perfect.
okay?
That
Okay,
is
so-
perfect.
yeah,
Yeah, of
okay.
course. Thank you.
I'll do it. Button and you'll see the red. That means your microphone's on, okay? So always remember that. And if you're not speaking, perhaps turn it off so to reduce any background noise for the viewing audience, okay? Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mike Frieda, and I'm honored to be co-chair of this Veterans Grave Committee Task Force to undertake a mission to see how we can improve the condition of grave sites throughout the state of Connecticut. A little bit of background about me, and then I'll ask everyone here to introduce themselves and give them a little bit of time to introduce themselves and present their background. So currently, I'm North Haven's chief elected official as first selectman. I sit on various state boards and chair various committees throughout the state of Connecticut, representing our district, our town, and our region. I have been past president of Connecticut Conference of Municipalities and two-time chairman of our Council of Governments in the South Central region. I've been in this room many times. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be working with everyone here. And I'd like to thank our state representative, Anthony Nolan, for being here and all the hard work he's done to help us assemble this meeting. Thank you, Anthony. So I'm going to start from my far right, your left, Jamie Cosgrove.
Work closely with the proponent of this proposed working group bill. This is a issue that was near and dear to this individual, has garnered support throughout the community, and look forward to looking for solutions to improve the care and upkeep of our veterans' graves.
Good afternoon. My name is Ronald Shea. I'm here as the representative of the Connecticut Cemetery Association, which is the only statewide organization dedicated to the maintenance and preservation of all cemeteries in our state. Members include both cemeterians and supplier partners, such as directors, superintendents, landscapers, masons, etc. I am the general manager of St. Agnes Cemetery in Brantford, as part of my role as business manager of St. John Bosco Parish in Brantford, which owns and operates St. Mary and St. Agnes cemeteries.
My name is John Carmen. I'm president of Carmen Funeral Homes. We operate 9 facilities in Hartford and Tolland County. I am also past president of the Connecticut Funeral Directors Association, and I'm also past president of the National Funeral Directors Association back in 2000. I have been chairman of the Windsor Veterans Memorial Cemetery for 45 years. It's a town-owned and operated cemetery. We receive no state or federal funds, but it's always we've been able to take care of it ourselves, and the community budget has done a a good job for us. And our park department maintains it. Obviously, in our work, we are involved with cemeteries literally all over the country. Obviously, locally, many almost involved with many of the cemeteries, certainly in Hartford and Tolland and New Haven County. So I'm glad to be here, glad to do anything I can to support veterans in any capacity. Our family has a long history of service in all branches of the service. So, and I still have two sons that are currently serving. One that is commander of the U.S. Border Patrol in Arizona, and another one that is in charge of a security company working for the State Department in the Middle East.
Thanks very much. Good afternoon. My name is John Carragher. I'm the manager of Veterans Advocacy and Assistance with the Connecticut Department of Veterans Affairs. One of the things that I also do is serve as the director of our state veteran cemetery in Middletown, and happy to be here and help us any way I can. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I am Jim Benoit. I am the section chief for the environmental health section at the Department of Public Health. I also look forward to working to find hopefully some creative solutions for this. Our role in the environmental health piece is actually to permit private cemeteries. So that's kind of under our septic program, protect groundwater. So there's some tangential connections there, but I certainly think that we can work together to find some solutions to help our veterans out. And my father was a veteran, and I really appreciate the work he did and all the other veterans that have been out there and put their lives on line for us. Thank you all.
Good morning. I am Anthony Nolan. I am state representative of New London, and I am the House Chair for the Military and Veterans Committee. And I am just grateful to be here to see this come to fruition finally. We were a little delayed in getting members in, but we finally have done it. And I just look forward to hearing some of the ideas that may come forward in regards to how the state of Connecticut can ensure that the resting place of those who fought so hard for us, that they are resting in, we can make sure ways come up to help us make sure those graves are taken care of. Thank you.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. So we have a very important mission, as we have identified here. And sometimes in an effort to determine the solutions to the mission, we need to ask the questions that in the beginning may be rhetorical, but they may be the questions that could help trigger thought processes and allow us to come up with some conclusions. So as I see some of the questions, one of the questions I think has to be, what is the role of Connecticut's municipalities in helping manage these cemeteries and the cemeteries that we as municipalities own? And I can offer some thoughts as to how we do that in North Haven. The second question is a little bit more arcane and ambiguous, and that is, what is the role and what is the true meaning of perpetual care with the other cemeteries that are beyond the jurisdiction of our municipalities? Does perpetual care, how far does it go? What does it entail? And does it include managing, manicuring, and helping improve every single gravestone in those cemeteries? So to give you a starting point in terms of how we handle this in North Haven, we have a couple of cemeteries that are under our control. And what we do as a municipality is we hire an outside contractor. We go out to bid every 2 years to help support the efforts of our Public Works Department. The role of that contractor is to maintain and manicure those cemeteries from a lawn mowing standpoint, from a gravestone standpoint, and as best they can during the course of the year to those groundstones to ensure that those groundstones are visible to the families who visit our cemeteries. During that particular month, it's a month by month, a bi-monthly effort by the outside contractor whom we hire to manicure and maintain those cemeteries. But beyond that, we also leverage our Public Works Department to do periodic checkups to see if anything has changed. As an example, in hurricanes, tornadoes, and storms, some of the headstones may be toppled or may be dismantled to a certain degree from the ground. Our Public Works will handle that. We also react to those who say, hey, my grandfather's headstone has been displaced that we may not have seen, or the outside contractor might have missed. So our Public Works, we will deploy them on a phone call by phone call basis to help improve those cemeteries. Have we had problems? Of course, particularly after storms. But those problems that we have, we either find those problems during the process I just mentioned, or we react to the problems when those loved ones go to the cemeteries and see those problems. That's how we handled this in our municipality. In North Haven, we have a Catholic cemetery, All Saints Cemetery, who does an outstanding job in utilizing the perpetual care model to improve any problems that they may see on those graves, veterans' graves or anyone else's graves. Now, I understand that that may not be exactly the way it works in every cemetery. So I think one of our goals and missions here, gentlemen and ladies and gentlemen watching on TV, is how we can define the perpetual care aspect on a cemetery by cemetery basis. And if there are those cemeteries that their perpetual care does not stretch into the individual stones that are in the ground, then perhaps one of our recommendations may be to the state of Connecticut and how we can get some funding for those entities. That is a framing of how I see the issues here. I'd like to turn it over to my colleagues, see if they have any thoughts.
I can speak a little bit and maybe even from the cemetery side. More cemeteries refer to that fund rather than perpetual care, more to endowed care, meaning that they have funds set aside in their endowment, the interest of which is used to take care of those stones. It also should be noted that if any veteran stone, whether it be a flush marker or an upright marker, is damaged, broken, even chipped, the federal government will replace that marker, and at no cost. So the only cost might be for the cemetery staff to be able to reset it or place it in the cemetery. So there's no reason that any government marker should ever be broken or in any way damaged, and it should be replaced. We routinely do that in our veterans cemetery in Windsor. I mean, it happens. Some of the old marble stones, softer material, even over the years, string trimmers can have an effect on almost cutting them. But we make the application and send it into the VA, and they promptly replace them. So.
Thank you, John. John, before we move to this side, would you like to make any comments?
No, at this time, I'm kind of in receive mode. I don't really have anything additional to add, other than it's a lot of work. And some of the things based on what you said is I think we need to take a look at what is the scope of the problem, so that we can kind of frame our response appropriately. And then, also to consider that, and obviously I don't know how many cemeteries there are across the state of Connecticut, but the majority of them, to my understanding, don't have separate veterans sections. So and these are just things that I think we need to consider. How do we parse our efforts there? And as an example, my father, who is a veteran, is buried, and my sister is buried next to him, and my sister is not a veteran. So as we apply resources towards cemeteries from a resource management perspective, how do we how do we want to kind of approach that when otherwise you end up, what you would end up doing is the entire cemetery when we started out looking to take care of veteran cemeteries or veterans graves. Great point that John made on the replacement of headstones and markers. And I would encourage anybody, it's a relatively simple form to fill out, and the VA is very good about shipping those out. And that's definitely an option if you've got worn or damaged government headstones in your cemeteries.
So John, before we move to Jim, if we could stay on that point for a second, Ron and Jamie and John. If that was a great point that John mentioned. So would it be the role of the cemetery itself, then the Catholic cemetery, to file that form to try to replace that headstone? Is that how this group sees it working?
If the cemetery knows that it's damaged, most of them know they can call a funeral director in that town to do that for them. We do that all the time. And for nothing, obviously, this is an important thing to do for our veterans and for those families. But the cemetery can apply for it as well. And some of them don't have offices, some of the small cemeteries, they don't have, their people are volunteers, and some of them have been in those capacities for 50 or more years. It seems to be passed on from generation to generation, but they take care of everything as best as they can. And some have support help, again, volunteers in the cemetery, and then they employ contractors to do the grave preparation and place stones and everything. Anybody that's involved in those should just have that extra oversight on veteran stones, because there's veteran stones in virtually every cemetery in the state of Connecticut. And most of them are actually in private cemeteries, I would venture to say. Yeah.
Jim, would you like to offer any comments?
Certainly, yeah. I'm also here in the receiver mode for the most part today, but I obviously there's kind of like the best practice model you talk about. This town steps in and they do the work, they make sure it gets done, they contract it out. But also we're talking about these smaller private cemeteries and other places where the veterans are interred. And to me, part of that is they're going to have to be a good educational campaign about resources. Specifically, if how can you get a headstone, a footstone replaced? What are the steps? And something like that. I think that's something we'll take on as we grow here. But part of that, I think, will be just information out to the public, to others, so that they know a better idea of the steps they need to take for the resources that are available. And maybe we need to do an inventory of what other resources are out there. I'm sure it's very limited, but that's something we could also take on. Thank you.
Jamie?
Thanks. Selectman Frida, we initially started with, the definition of perpetual care. And I think that needs to be kind of flushed out a little bit more. And in my mind is, what is the responsibility in terms of providing that perpetual care? What is really, I think, again, what brought this to the forefront is more than not so much the damaged headstones or the markers. I think those have been, addressed when it happened, but over time, if you go by, just use, we're in Branford, St. Agnes. St. Agnes is, I would not classify as a neglected cemetery. I know there's it's well kept, and however, it's the markers themselves over time are settling, which I believe is quite common in probably cemeteries across the state. The mowing, the trimming, the brush, the day-to-day care is taking place. However, around those markers themselves, and I think the concern is over time, those markers will eventually be lost. And I think, we touched upon resources. A municipality has probably many more resources that it could draw upon in terms of its Parks and Rec Department, the Public Works Department, just an appropriation process through its annual budget, where many of these smaller private cemeteries don't have that same amount of resources. Then we have to ask the question, well, if we're going to appropriate resources, what is the mechanism that one would be able to avail themselves to those resources? I'm sure we're all aware that we do have the neglected cemetery grant program, which municipalities can take advantage of through OPM, where they can request funds to the care of cemeteries that may be under their control. Town of Branford in the past has one small cemetery in town that we've utilized that grant program. But again, that is limited to such tasks as brush trimming, mowing, cutting back, like a once a year type of effort to kind of keep everything cut back. I wonder if we look at existing programs and if we can broaden the eligible uses of those programs to include such things as, the raising of the markers, right? I think, how are we going to deploy resources and what's the public purposes? I think as we went around this room, we're all in agreement that we need to ensure that we preserve the integrity of our veterans' grave markers. I think there's a great public purpose for that. And to maybe look at existing programs, which not only municipalities, but perhaps associations and privately held cemeteries could utilize those opportunities to fund such efforts, projects to restore the markers.
So before we move over to Ron, because he's got a great deal of experience with the Catholic Cemetery in Branford, to Jamie's point, one of the things we may want to consider is if OPM still has this grant program, and let's say there's monies that can be made available, and we can expand it to the markers, then the question becomes, can the municipality apply for it, receive it, and then work with the private cemetery and somehow transfer the funds over, or administer it such that the private cemetery can hire an outside contractor to perform the work, and then the municipality pay the invoice because they're the recipient of the money? That might be something we may want to consider if the program still is in effect. So Ron, interested to hear your thoughts.
Okay. I too am here in a sense in listening mode to determine what the goals of the committee are, what its scope is, and what the questions are, because I may not have all the questions that maybe not all the membership of the Connecticut Cemetery Association would say, wait a minute, that's not what we do. So I'd like maybe an opportunity to determine what these definitional questions are, and perhaps do a quick online poll of all the cemeterians through the organization's leadership to say, how do you define endowed or perpetual care? How do you handle it? How do you use it? Those kinds of things. So rather than, because I consider myself primarily the representative of the association and not just a cemetery. So I wouldn't want to give an answer for all of the members without getting that input. So that's why I'm in listening mode along those lines. It is true that and we are a Catholic cemetery, but we are not part of the Archdiocesan Catholic Cemetery Association, as well, to make that clear up front. So we're not part of the group that runs All Saints in North Haven, a very fine cemetery. We're cordial. We speak to each other. Ultimately, we all report to the Archbishop, but we do as a parish cemetery. It's a ministry of the parish, and we use the advice and consent of the Archdiocesan Cemeteries Association and the secular statewide association. So, and yes, actually the state legislation uses the terms perpetual and endowed almost interchangeably. So that being said, to talk for my specific viewpoint as St. Agnes Cemetery is we call it endowed care. And the general philosophy is it's to be used for the general maintenance of the grounds, mowing the lawn, trimming, close to the markers, plowing the roads during the wintertime, collecting up the leaves in the fall, that kind of thing for the overall maintenance of the cemetery. And certainly, yes, responding to issues of sunken markers. Again, the cemetery has been around for over 100 years, several managements. There are ways to install a flush marker so it's less likely to sink than others. We've tried to move forward on that. So as sunken, we call them flush markers, are brought to our attention. We raise them, put crushed stone underneath them, put them back, and they, generally speaking, then stay put.
Mhm.
The other issue is the overgrowth of grass, crabgrass, what have you, which requires much more focused effort of getting down on their hands and knees, and using a hand clipper kind of thing that a mower or a trimmer really can't address. So just I'd like to be able to find out from the other members how they would feel or how they interpret that terminology. So as a working group, we can have something to go on moving forward.
So after listening to how Ron described this, my interpretation is that there, and I don't know this factually, this is just my interpretation after listening to how Ron described it, that there is a difference between perpetual care and endowed care. If that's correct, and there are some cemeteries who do the endowed care, but not the perpetual care. And if it's correct, and I'm not sure, and John, you would know, and Ron, you would know better than me, if perpetual care is designed to take care of the stones in the ground, then one of our missions might have to be, how do we help those cemeteries who are doing endowed care, which does not include the scope of the ground stones that are being sunken? John, do you have a thought on that?
I do, and I think definitions are important, but I think you're confusing the terminology a little bit in that endowed care would refer to how the bill gets paid. Perpetual care would be how long the bill gets paid for. And I guess what I'm saying is and I don't think that it would be that there would be a division between routine lawn care and trimming, et cetera, and the maintenance of sunken and broken or misaligned stones. I think those are all, I think they should be all part of the same function, regardless of how it's, and I don't think I'm explaining it, what I'm trying to say. I think it's the same thing, two different terms, talking about the same thing. Now, whether that care, whether you call it endowed or perpetual, what that entails is probably different according to, by different cemeteries. And I would have to go back and look, because I just did one in my local cemetery for a family member. And now I'm going to go back and actually read what they sent me, to see what that says.
Okay, good.
But I'd welcome anybody else, but I think the term, although probably not interchangeable, should encompass both the maintenance and uniformity of the headstones or other markers, as well as the general upkeep of in a perfect world. I'm not saying that that's how it is. But I think both of those things should be part of that definition.
Very good, John.
it's important, I think, for everybody to realize that vast majority, if not almost all of the cemeteries are not for profit. Is that fair to say? I mean, there used to be maybe one or two privately owned cemeteries, but for the most part, they still also operated as not-for-profits because the property is not taxed or anything. Most was a throwback to the old ecclesiastical societies, that used to exist. A lot of them tied to churches or organizations. The Masons, the Odd Fellows, or individual churches owned these cemeteries and took care of them. And then when their only inventory was selling the graves, and then again, because there was nothing taken out, but pretty much all of the money went into their endowed care fund and was invested. I remember years ago, we used to have to go to the probate court every year. I was involved in 2 other cemeteries and have to go to the probate court and get our records from the old Hartford National Bank about what we did with our money, what it had earned, and how much that we spent on the mowing and any other upkeep costs. So some cemeteries were very good at that. And they had several $100,000 that were invested and that allowed them to make their repairs and do some of those things. Others, not so much, or they were smaller cemeteries and they also fell into disrepair. So, and again, some towns took them over and some towns, they gave them to these societies or nonprofit corporations with volunteers so that they would take care of them. One other point, and it's something that's worked very well. Our State Veterans Commission pays a monument company or a cemetery a small fee to set or place a government marker. If you're a resident of the state of Connecticut, when you die and you are a veteran, then as a funeral home, we always send in a application for that federal marker, and we send in an application to the State Veterans Commission. And then when that stone is installed by either a monument company or the cemetery, they get a reimbursement, $100, $125. Yeah, it's up to $125 to set that stone. And almost all cemeteries do it for what that allowance is for a veterans marker, where on the private side, they might charge $175 or $200 to do that. But so there's already a system in place where an application is made by either family member, the monument company, or the cemetery to ask for that, for that benefit from the state. Whether a system that works similar to that for repair or, raising some of these stones in the future that might be able to be worked out on that grant system. The idea is to make it simple, and that if you've got family members, that they can initiate it. But if somebody doesn't have any anymore, a cemetery may wish to do it and, go through and take inventory and maybe raise, a dozen or 15, 20 stones a year, and just do that on a basis that they want to keep them correct. And they're not really sinking. What's happening is the turf is growing over them. It just happens, it's a natural evolution. And anyway, I do know that in the case of the Archdiocese, that they actually, when anyone applies for a application to a foundation or to place a monument or a stone in the cemetery, they collect a endowed care fee as part of that, with the idea that they're putting that money aside to, in the future, be able to raise those stones if the turf is overgrowing them, or to take care of repairs if they need to be shifted or something like that. Sometimes they have to be moved when a burial's made. So they are being proactive in that, but that's only the archdiocese that I'm aware of that does that.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes,
if-
Ron.
If we could get back to the, I think the issue of perpetual versus endowed care, in some ways it's semantics, it's distinction without a difference. I think all of our cemeterians would agree, especially those of us in Catholic world, that we have a perpetual obligation to maintain the cemetery in good condition, until we Catholics believe the second coming, which who knows, might as well say it's perpetual. How we fund that is maybe where the word endowed comes into play. Is we are required to put 25% of the proceeds of every sale of a grave, to put 25% into a fund that is professionally managed, and the income from that fund is returned to the cemetery to use for its general expenses. The theory is the day will come at every cemetery when it's full, at least theoretically. There are no more sales happening. There are, minimal burials happening. And yet we still have that obligation to keep it reasonably well maintained. They should always be places of respectfulness of prayer. So in that theoretical environment, what would it cost an organization to hire contractors? If the cemetery doesn't have staff anymore, why would you have staff if you're not having sales, not having burials? And so you would hope would be that endowment would throw off enough income every year to do that annual or ongoing maintenance. And some cemeteries already do that. They just don't have any current sales or many burials, so they contract it out. And we cannot invade the principle. Principle is, in a sense, endowed, and therefore the only thing that's available is the earnings, because we want that to be those earnings to be available in perpetuity, until we no longer need the graves. So that's maybe why the term endowed has come into play, is that the principle is protected from being invaded for someone who has an idea. Oh, let's do this to enhance, the appearance of the cemetery. Let's put in gates, or I'm making this stuff up. But no, you can't touch your principle for that. It needs to be protected, just like any endowment for any organization or church or what have you. Is that an endowment is restricted as to the principle, but not the revenues.
So, before I ask Jamie if he has any comments on this, and listening to Ron in terms of how he described this, let's assume that there's a gap in some of these cemeteries, their endowment or their perpetual care funds don't allow them to do everything that should be done, particularly with the groundstones. How do we, in the spirit of collaboration, develop a plan to help these cemeteries, to provide them the ability to go beyond what their financial endowment or perpetual care fund allows them to do, to support the extra work that needs to be done to help improve these stones? I don't have the answer to that. And secondly, if we, as a Catholic, I know that there's a distinction between church and state. How does the state help the archdiocese, which is a Catholic cemetery, when traditionally there's always a distinction between church and state? How do we bridge this, gentlemen? How do we do that?
That unfortunately, Connecticut does not have a requirement of how much a cemetery can, or what they should set aside. I guess you set aside, or the archdiocese recommends 25%. There are some states that recommend as much as 50%. So that a lot more money is going into those funds. Because most all of our cemeteries were not for profits, the idea was that all of the money from the sale of lots and everything else was in fact endowed. And so they didn't have to worry about it. But obviously there's a lot of cemeteries that just don't They don't have those resources.
Jamie, any thoughts?
Actually, just to kind of. I was on this. I'll kind of get back to the purpose. Also, I believe that they were the state legislature that setting this up as to where the families look at if it's appropriate or what would be the pathway for families. Consumer protection, I believe. That was an appropriate act. Is that something that, you know, I'm happy. Families to go.
Well, that's a great question, and maybe Ron, John, and John could weigh in on that. You'd have more expertise.
So
on it.
I would, and that's really where I come out first and foremost. Well, two things. One, excuse me, what is the recourse that I have when I made that purchase of those two plots with the expectation of perpetual care for my loved one's graves? So that's question number one. Question number two, though, is in many cases, I think what we will find in a lot of significantly neglected cemeteries, there's no one behind it anymore. In other words, the association or the ecclesiastical organization or whatever it was that started that cemetery, especially in some of our older cemeteries, no longer exists anymore. So that's another significant question that I would have. But again, I wholeheartedly agree that it's very much a consumer protection question, because it's and I'm not a lawyer, but if I sign a contract with XYZ, who, you know, fill in the blank of the name of the cemetery, and part of that contract is the maintenance and upkeep of said cemetery, then when that contract is breached, or at least in my opinion is breached, what's my recourse? And again, I'm asking questions I don't have answers to, but to me, that seems like a pretty, and I think you hit the nail right on the head. Where do I go when the cemetery, whoever is running that cemetery, isn't living up to their obligations under that contract, at least in my opinion?
So, Ron, go right ahead.
Yes, thank you. I want to thank Selectman Cosgrove for bringing up that question: is what is the charge of the working group? Because that is, I think, is key, is to directions and how far we get involved in, you know, the actual answers to questions. And again, asking the right questions is key. Because if one looks back at the history of the original bill, Senate Bill 363, it was requiring or asking that the DCP create a department, you know, to receive complaints against cemetery associations for lack of upkeep on veterans' graves. And second, to create a cemetery board within the Department of Veterans Affairs to coordinate with the DCP in resolving such complaints. And both the then commissioners of Consumer Protection and Veterans Affairs spoke, I'm not going to say in opposition, but raised, you know, concerns about they don't have a process for that. They'd have to create a bureaucracy and, you know, unfunded mandates, whatever you want to call them. So they had concerns and also concerns about, and I know this is going to sound like uh, being against motherhood, apple pie, and the American flag, but treating veterans' graves with in an unequal way with those who are not veterans. And that's your point about, brother and sister, one's a veteran, one's not, paying special attention to the detriment of ordinary folk, if you will. So both of those then commissioners had concerns about those issues. So whether that's also within the charge of this task force to say, if we're going to create a process, who's going to fund that, those kinds of things. So I'm not giving an answer. I'm saying it was on the table originally.
So let's stay on that for a second. If that's an option, we'll have, and Ed, we'll have public comment afterwards. If that ends up to be an option we pursue, what happens then if the committees are formed and DCP is involved, but the private cemeteries, no matter what they're told by DCP, they don't have the resources to handle it. I think then we're potentially getting into an area where we're still going to remain with the same problem, unless there's some jurisdiction with the DCP over the private cemeteries and the Catholic cemeteries. I'm not sure there would be. John, what do you think?
Difficult.
Right.
Yeah, there's not necessarily a good answer. So many times families take the initiative. Families go out and they trim around the stones and they do that work. Some families do, some families don't. So, some feel it's their responsibility. Some of them, like you said, they have that perpetual care, so they didn't have to do it. Because years ago, they used to get a bill every year for $5 or something, and the cemeteries wanted to avoid that. That was a nightmare. So they basically put that up front endowment or perpetual care fee and the cost of purchasing a lot. The cemeteries, there's monument companies that are there and can do this work if the people themselves can't do it. Obviously it may have a cost to it, and they need to be paid for their work, but there are ways that it can be done. And most cemeteries, in my experience, if a family has a complaint and they ask them to do something, that most of them find a way to do it. They ask their maintenance people and everything else, and can you give special attention to, Mr. Smith's stone? His family is all upset that the grass is growing all around it. And obviously his wife is 85 years old and she can't go out there and do it herself. But, it's really, I think, more all the ones that don't have anybody that's either checking on them or that they've just been that way for years. And I'm not sure there's necessarily an answer to it. But just putting money after it not necessarily always works. But it's interesting discussions, and I think it's good that we have this, because it would be nice to be able to take care of veterans' graves and stones.
So we wanted to start out with these questions and identify possible solutions and offer these rhetorical questions to get insight from all of the people here, many of whom are experts. And I should say that this is not a process, ladies and gentlemen, for those watching on CTN. This is not a process where today we're charged with coming up with a solution. Representative Nolan has told me and told us that we will have as much time as we need to come forward with a solution to the General Assembly. Now, the General Assembly, the session will end sometime in May. If we had started this back maybe in September, we might have been able to have a report. I think we should proceed with doing everything we're doing, try to come up with solutions. The DCP issue that Mr. Cosgrove brought up, I think, is something that has to be considered also. But as far as today's concerned, we're not under a time frame pressure to finalize this. We have time. And if need be, we have the support of Representative Nolan that we can be extended to continue this work to eventually present a report to the General Assembly. To me, I tend to be very solution oriented. As Jamie knows, in government, we're kind of where the rubber meets the road. We get 100 calls a day. We're constantly trying to solve problems. I throw out the questions to try to identify what the solutions may be. I'm going to offer a thought, and I think that Ron, John, and John would know much better than I would if this is a possible thought and an avenue for us to pursue. Is there a way that we can collaborate with all the different cemeteries and identify an inventory of the cemeteries, and then identify those cemeteries that need help from a perpetual or endowment care standpoint? And we then identify potentially a list over the course of time. And if the state is willing to help solve this problem with us, which obviously they are because they appointed us on this committee, is it through the OPM grant that Mr. Cosgrove brought up, that we can apply for grants and help those cemeteries that are in need? Would we have the Archdiocese support on that if some of those cemeteries are Catholic cemeteries? Can we identify the private cemeteries? Who's responsible for them? Those cemeteries that don't have any help, so that these stones can be improved. So the question is, can we identify an inventory of all the cemeteries across Connecticut and determine which ones need help, John? I don't know.
And you would know, I think, probably, do you have a listing of all the cemeteries that exist, even if they're not members of your association?
I don't have an answer for that because I'm not involved in I'm an officer of the association. I was just asked by them to be the representative to this group. So, but I can ask the leadership if that exists. I have a sense because they're a membership organization, they probably only know for sure those cemeteries that pay their dues and come to events and or not, or just get the newsletter, what have you. So I have a feeling the answer is going to be, we can tell you who our members are. We can't tell you who they aren't. But I'm happy to ask that question. Leadership may well be watching today, so they may already be acting on this.
Thanks.
And I think everyone agrees that the purpose of the working committee here is to help. We're not in a position we're trying to dictate to anybody anything, but we've identified what the problems are. We're charged with coming up with some solutions. So for those who may be watching out there, who may be private cemeteries or even local managers of Catholic cemeteries, I hope you would look at this committee as a resource and not necessarily a threat. We're trying to help solve this problem.
And it's important to remember that the charge of the committee is veterans' graves, veterans' stones. Obviously, knowing how the whole system is structured is important for that, but that's what we are supposed to be focusing on, and that's important because cemeteries there's less burials now than there were 25 years ago. So in Connecticut, the cremation rate is around 50%, 55% in that vicinity. Many people they still after cremation will have the ashes buried in a cemetery. And a lot of times they're able to bury on top of an existing grave or a parent or a brother or a sister. So there's being much more use of the ground than it was, say, 25 or 50 years ago. But it also means that the cemeteries have got to be very careful of how they manage their funds, because they are not selling as many full burial plots, which are going to add money to their endowed care funds, which means that down the road, they're going to have less money to perform these functions. So overall, I mean, in the scheme of things, this is going to make not only caring for veterans stones, but caring for cemeteries is going to be difficult. And it may end up that some of the municipalities may ending up taking over some of those cemeteries again, just out of respect.
All right, so before we're an hour into the meeting, and I do want to get into public comment. So I'd like to offer anyone any other comments before we move to public comment, and then I will offer a summary of what I think, at least some really good things we identified today. Any other comments, gentlemen? Jim?
I'm wondering if it would do us good to maybe look at what other states have done to address this, if there's a way of doing that. Because I mean, we're obviously this is happening across the country, and maybe some other states have found some solutions, or at least pathways to get towards solutions.
I think it's a great point. That's something we should look into. Any other comments? No? All right, I'd like to open it up to public comment. We have Mr. Ed Zach here from Brantford, who, Ed, if you'd like to come up to that seat right there. Right, straight ahead, Ed. Ed has also been very instrumental in helping move this committee forward. So Ed, thank you for your efforts. And please, Ed, press the button so you see the red dot on the console there. Very good.
Thank you. Just a couple of things. Thank you, committee, and thank you to First Selectman Cosgrove. If first is this going to be at the final meeting or?
No, Ed, as I said earlier, this is an ongoing process.
Okay,
So
then, when is the meeting's going to be scheduled then, or do you decide now, or?
the way it normally works is we would meet monthly.
Okay, and then, Representative Nolan, can you tell me what the process is then? Does this report go to you then, or what happens?
Ed, during this meeting, you have to talk to the chair,
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
and then the chair will, if he can't answer it, then he'll ask if anybody else wants to comment on it, or
Oh.
the clerk could,
Yeah.
you can refer to the clerk.
So Ed, the clerk, MJ here, he has an answer. MJ?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The reports for working groups go to the Committee of Cognizance. So for this one, after meetings have happened, however long that process will take, we'll write up a report, and that will go to the General Law Committee, the Veterans Committee, and the Public Health Committee to look over.
Okay, and then does someone sponsor a bill then, or?
Yeah, so,
Yes.
so that's then a bill would be sponsored, and then in the end, Ed, it would go to a vote in the General Assembly.
Okay. If there could be a definition from the committee to define what is neglect versus abandon, too, if you could please consider that. Because I was told that there are definitions for that.
Okay, that's a very good point.
Okay, and then the second thing is on a transparency. Should the financial statements of these perpetual or endowed be available to the consumers who bought or purchased the contracts?
I don't have an answer for that one. MJ, I know you don't, and Representative Nolan, I think it's kind of beyond our scope on this, I believe.
Yeah, that's beyond our scope, I think. This committee would only be responsible for if they project the state creating a fund in regards to recommendations. And then if that is approved, we would put in a bill for it, and then there would be someone that oversees that.
So I think it's important, Ed,
Sure.
to stay on this point, okay? So what Representative Nolan is referring to is that if there's a fund available that could be created from the state to help solve these problems, that I think will go a long way.
Yeah.
But this committee, in my judgment, and it's just been echoed here, would have no authority to demand financial statements from the cemeteries.
Okay, thank you. And then, I've been involved in this for 6 years, and frankly, not too long, but I've seen it where people are in tears in their eyes, where, their markers are covered with weeds. Okay, and if I could just share, with the committee, the photos, and this is all it involves. And it takes, I do about 25 to 30 now each year because it's not being done. Okay, I apologize for saying that, but so I do it for family and friends and people who come to me, and I've timed it, and it takes 30 to 45 seconds to trim per marker. Okay, that's all it takes. So if I could,
So, Ed, if you'd like to step forward, you can give the photos to me and I'll pass them out among the members.
okay,
This is this is the same photo, Ed, for one for everyone? Okay, thank you. Pass two down this one. Okay. And John, here you go. And we'll enter this in the record with the clerk.
and please note that these photos were taken within the past 5 to 6 days.
Okay, Ed, continue, please.
Oh, no, that's it. I
That's
just
it.
want to,
Okay.
it's for the people and to give the people a voice if they have concerns
Yes.
when there is no recourse.
Okay.
Which, is occurring now.
Yep.
Okay, I apologize to say that. That's not intended, but people need a voice. Okay, that's all. It's not to develop a big department. It's just pick up the phone, say, there's a concern. Okay, that's all.
Ed, I know you've been involved now for 6 years and we've had many discussions, you and I, you've had many discussions with Mr. Cosgrove and Representative Nolan.
Mhm.
So staying on the issue of the people should have a voice, and they should, everyone should have a voice. Are those voices being ignored in your opinion? Because the process would be to, as John mentioned earlier, to call the cemetery directly and voice the opinion and see if a solution can be developed. Are you finding in your research that voices are not being listened to?
I believe so. Okay. Based on my 6 years of trying to help these people, okay, and it's not criticism, okay, but for about 6 years, okay, and there is a story in the papers, 5 stories about cemeteries, okay, of the concerns of the people, and there's quotes too in here, and I'll be happy to get copies for the committee on that. And please note that the current statutes are 35 years old. And I think that because of the age of the 35 year old statutes, that they should be updated. Okay, and then on these statutes, there is no need for a big department. Just pick up the phone if they have a concern. Okay, that's all it is. It's very cost effective that way. And I think the first Selectman Cosgrove and Representative Nolan and Mr. Frieda, the first Selectman Frieda apologized to realize when people come in tears in their eyes, these people care. And I'm sure the committee does too.
Well,
Yeah.
I had that experience in North Haven during the last hurricane. We had
Mhm.
5 people in tears because the stones, and these weren't ground stones, these were headstones displaced. It was almost like an earthquake in the cemetery. So we fielded those calls and we got our public works and the outside contractor to put everything back in place. And so I've seen the range of emotions, Ed, from that despair to the
Mhm.
happiness of tears after everything has been put back together again.
Okay, that's all it is.
Right.
It's that simple. And then, I was telling, what's your first name again? Jim, apologize, Jim, that, I was transferred, between TPH and DCP back to TPH. So, there should be some form of definitions of, of whom to go to. And a perfect example was a letter, in the paper, and I'll get copies to the committee, where this woman at a church-owned cemetery wrote that they did not know where to go to. So it's just clarification.
Okay. Anything else you'd like to comment on, Ed?
Well, thank you very much.
All right.
I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And
Okay.
thank you for your time.
All right. So if I can offer a summary and then we'll ask for any other closing comments. Is everyone good with meeting once a month? Does that work? All right, so we have February, March, April, knowing that the session ends in May. So we have 3 months to see if we could finalize something, but if it does not happen, then we go into May and then we identify the schedule after that. So in future meetings, we can evaluate our progress, see if we need to continue. And if we have to continue, we have assurances that we will be extended. A couple of things jumped out at me today that I did not know. And John made a couple of these points, John, about if a stone is displaced or broken, you can file to the federal government to get that replaced. I thought that was very interesting. And for those watching out there, if you are like me and you didn't realize that, I think that's a very important thing. And as John mentioned earlier, you can actually go to the funeral home and have that application either filled out or pick it up and fill it out yourself, right, John?
And it's available online through the Veterans Administration website. It's very, very simple. You can print it out. They have a PDF you can fill out. It could be faxed or mailed.
And if there are those stones out there and if there are people out there that didn't realize this, and if those people are in despair because those stones are broken or displaced, this information that John shared with us, I think is very important to help at least start this process, John.
And you do have to include a picture, take a picture of the stone, the damage, so that it can be seen.
With a letter explaining, the circumstances.
What we will do, Mr. Cosgrove and I, we will look to see, and working with Representative Nolan on this neglected cemetery grant program through OPM. And perhaps, Jamie, we can examine, maybe even work with CCM or cost on this to determine, are we the ones eligible? And if so, are we able to share them with private cemeteries, file the grant, get the money, and then work with these cemeteries. And I think that was another good thing that came up here today. John?
Just a note, Mr. Chair, as I was sitting here, I looked real quick, and you might want to take a look at Connecticut General Statutes, section 19A-308. And it's kind of hard to see on the phone, but that appears to be the governing statute for the neglected cemetery grant program.
Very good. Thank you. So it's 19A-308, John, right?
That's correct. 19A-308.
Okay. Very good. As part of the summary, I'd like to also explain what happens at these meetings at the state level for us as working committee members or task force members. The chairman worked very closely with the clerk. MJ's our clerk. Minutes will be submitted to us before the next meeting. We'll have a chance to look at the minutes, make any revisions as we see it. And I think that if nothing else happened today, ladies and gentlemen, there's three things that have happened. Two we just mentioned about the OPM grant, what John mentioned about the federal grant statute that John there mentioned, and also the fact that this meeting is memorialized through CTN TV, and also minutes of this meeting will be distributed. So I think that we've laid at least a foundation today for the next meeting and future meetings after that. And that was at least one of my goals. I knew we weren't going to solve this today. I think everyone would agree. Just establish a foundation that we can build off to help solve this problem. Anyone else like to make any comments? Okay. Thank you very much. Yes, Representative Nolan.
First, I want to just say again, thank you for being in the seats that you are in. This is, I think, going to help the state of Connecticut a great deal. And we are looking forward to working along with you. Just to be clear, I am not on the committee. I am just, a big supporter of the committee. Senator Cohen is the one who put the bill in, a fantastic bill. For those at home that are looking to send in information, you can send it in to the committee clerk for the Veterans Committee, or you can send it to myself, or you can even send it to Senator Marks, who is the chair, my co-chair in the Senate. This is something that's very important to both of us, and we look forward to a lot of the things that were discussed in here coming to fruition. If you believe that there are any statutes, as Ed stated when he was up there, that need to be revisited, or legislation needs to be put in, feel free to give me a call. If you don't have my number, I'll give it to you before we leave. I will be putting in a bill to extend the time period for you to come up with solutions that are needed. If need be, we will go as far as into the next year, because you never know with what you're going to come up with in regards to what you're tasked to do. And it is a big task. And I do want to say to people at home, proof like this I don't consider this criticism. I consider this concern. And this is what we hope to alleviate from happening in the communities that it's happening in. Our veterans deserve better. And I'm glad that this group has come together to make sure that we as a state are responsible enough to make sure that we help do something to alleviate some of this that's going on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative Nolan. And for those watching on CTN TV, we thank you for watching this afternoon. We will look forward to our next meeting. Have a wonderful afternoon. And I'd like to ask for a motion to adjourn. Is there a second? Second. Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.